Shall we get the show on the road here? On the road.
Yeah. Anybody have information you need to share before we get started?
Yeah. On Zoom, I do see we have a guest, Ben McGeechee. Ben, if you would just briefly, hi, how you doing? If you just briefly give us a little bit about yourself, how you found. Ben McGeechee. Oh, we can't hear you. I'm sorry. I see you're unmuted, but the mic maybe isn't working. Okay, well, apparently, Ben, you've got technical difficulties. Welcome, sir. Glad to have you here. Hope that you enjoy this evening's presentation. And I don't see any other visitors. And I assume we don't have any in the room. It sounds like we just got our regular folk there. Okay, David, did you want to do an intro for Brad or?
Okay, good. I was on mute. So tonight our speaker is Brad Polt-Jones. Brad currently lives in Durango, and he's been there since 2021 when he moved out of San Francisco, the San Francisco area to Durango. He's been taking pictures for over 40 years, and he started in his early days as a ski photographer. And I suppose it's not fair to say that it went downhill, but from there.
Not fair at all.
Not fair at all, okay. Brad has been teaching photography for many years, over 20 years. And when I was talking to him last week, he was telling me that in the 90s, when he was finishing up his academic studies, he was at UCLA, and he was one of the early adopters, I think is probably a better way to put it, of digital photography. And he started teaching at the UCLA Extension in digital photography. And then from there, he's taught at the City College of San Francisco, Mission College in Los Angeles, and Mount San Antonio College. For the last several years, he's been doing both in-person workshops and online workshops and courses. He's trained over 5,000 students in the dynamic world of digital photography, and he's now offering his workshops globally via online courses, remote training, and live webinars. Tonight, Brad's going to talk about some of the AI tools in Photoshop and Lightroom. As I think most of us are aware, the AI tools can be used for enhancing, sometimes rescuing perhaps, images. They can also be used in generative forms to create new images. And while I think we're all kind of interested in the generative, I've asked Brad to focus primarily on the tools that we would use in Photoshop and Lightroom that take advantage of AI. And towards the end, I've asked Brad to kind of show some of the things that he's doing, some of which are quite interesting, with generative and composite images. And I know we still have some competition rules that for the moment, push us away from doing the generative AI, but I think we'll all have this curiosity about what it could do. And Brad's going to give us a taste of that. Brad, did I miss anything?
Sounds good.
Okay, well, why don't you take over the screen?
Okay, so as you were saying, I've been in the field forever. I started at 17 actually in Crested Butte in the ski industry. I actually have an image today I'll show you from 78 or 79, I think, back when we were all shooting film. So my first 30 years as a photographer was film-based. It wasn't until the late 90s when digital started becoming a reality that I started switching to that. I happened to be in graduate school in the mid-90s, and that's when digital photography really became a possibility. There was nothing before that other than working with scanned images. We've been using scanned film for a long time, but the first digital cameras were pretty rudimentary unless you were able to afford one of the big scanning backs for an 8x10. Those were amazing, but they're also $40,000 to $50,000, so not very many people had them. It was, I think, around 98, 99 that Canon and Nikon came out with their first, what we would consider to be pro level digital cameras. Although at the time they were only 1.6 megapixels. So they were really good for not much more than news reporting, newsprint, and stuff like that. But it changed really fast. By the time I started teaching at UCLA in 2000, we already had bumped our cameras up to about 4 to 5 megapixels. And then ever since then, it's just been an exponential increase of quality and resolution. So I haven't really shot much film in 25 years at this point. Um, I find it interesting that a lot of my students are very interested in film, as most young people are with the analog stuff, because records and things like that have a huge comeback at this point. But film is difficult to deal with today. It's expensive, and there's very little that's available. So digital, I think, is what everybody is shooting at this stage, I assume, right? Is anybody still shooting film here? Not really. Okay. I have obviously a huge backlog of film. So one of the things I've been doing over the past couple years is scanning some of those old materials and digitizing them. It used to be a hassle to scan film. You either had to have some very expensive equipment to get good quality, or you had to take it to a service bureau, but that's not really the case anymore. A lot of the film scanning that I'm doing now, I'm just doing it with my camera. So I actually have it sitting on the table. I don't know if anyone is interested, but this is a Nikon Z8, and I have the Nikon scanning device attached to a macro lens. It's a 60 millimeter macro lens. So this is what I've been using to scan. And this is a fairly high resolution sensor, 48 megapixels. So the quality of the scans are as good as anything I've ever had in the past. I think one of the advantages of this technology over the older flatbed scanners or the Imicon scanners is there's more depth of field that's available to this macro lens. So the film plane's never perfectly flat. So in the past, you either had to have it oil mounted to a drum scanner, which cost a ton of money, or you just left with the slight imperfections of the scanner not being able to capture a perfectly flat surface. This gets rid of all that. So I'll show you some examples that I have tonight of scan film that I'm going to be working with. So the focus of our lecture is the AI tool sets that are in Photoshop and Lightroom. The AI tools have been present for about a year or so now. Actually, some of the earliest versions of AI technology inside Photoshop and Lightroom were in the selection tools. They started using automated selections a couple of years ago. So it's not simply, AI is not just simply generative fill, although that's a pretty amazing technology. I'm going to show you a lot of different tools that are AI based that are inside these programs. So I'm going to be using Lightroom as my primary program to kind of scan through the files that I prepared for tonight, but many of them are going to go into Photoshop for further work. All right. If you have questions as I'm going, I think it's fine if you want to ask as we go, as long as you don't get too bogged down on it. So what I'm going to do is start a screen share. I have to say that I have been teaching with Zoom now for 4 years from San Francisco City College, right? When the pandemic started up until now, this is how I teach. So I'm pretty familiar with the Zoom setting. All right, so let's take a look. I have a couple of files here that I have broken up into different groups. These are for AI selection tools. And so I'm going to start off with this image here. I'm going to go ahead and open it up. Well, there's two places you can actually do AI selections. You can do it in Lightroom, and you can do it inside Photoshop as well. I usually prefer Photoshop for this, but I'm going to show you how the Lightroom tools work, okay? So I need to move some of these interface elements around so I can see my tool set. There we go. So I'm going to head off to the develop module here. And with this image, we're going to utilize some of the AI technology for building selections in the image. So this is the studio still life setup. It was done maybe a year ago. the most beneficial way to start building selections in the Lightroom is using the masking tool set, right? So if I switch over here to the masking tools, you can see that there are 3 primary AI modes. There's a subject selection tool, a sky selection tool, and background. But if you want to select something smaller, the objects, you're going to use the object option here. So you're going to select objects. And when this pops up, you're going to be able to, use different tools to actually build the selection, right? So the selection tool I want to use is, I'm going to use the object option. So this is how the object tool works. You have 2 modes. You can paint a selection in, or you can drag a selection boundary around it. So let's explore the painting tool, because I think that's a little bit better. It's pretty straightforward. Let's say we want to select the boots in this image. What I'm going to do is I'm going to paint over it. You can see that it uses a little red overlay to show where I'm painting. So I'm going to go right up to the edge of the boots. You don't have to be super critical here. In fact, it's not a bad thing to overlap a little bit on the edge. So I'm going to fill in the area there and encapsulate the middle. And as soon as I do that, the AI tech is going to go scan through the image and it's going to isolate the boot for me. So there it is. So when you select an object this way, you don't have quite the same level of fidelity for modifying the selection as you do in Photoshop, but it's fast and it's easy. One thing that's important to understand, like in this particular image, the green works very well because it's dominated by red tones. But if you wanted to change the color of your overlay, you can do that right here. You just simply click on the color chip and you can change it to whatever works for you. All right, so that's a really easy thing to update. You can also turn the overlay on or off. So when it's off, then you can actually see what you can do with the selection. So for instance, I could go and I can brighten up the boots a little bit by using the exposure slider. Or if I wanted, I could increase the contrast and maybe push the whites a little bit brighter. So that's how the basic selection tool in Lightroom works. What I'd like to do is I'm going to switch back to the library mode, and I'm going to show you a slightly different way of doing this in Photoshop. So I'm going to use my control key and I'm going to say edit in Photoshop. And when I do this, it's going to give me an option. It says edit a copy with Lightroom adjustments. If I do this, it's going to have those changes that I've already made to the boots embedded in the file that gets sent to Photoshop. So I just wanted to ignore it. So I'm going to say edit original, right? So this is a PSD file. It's a fairly high resolution document. This is one that I print out for some of my galleries. So the way that the AI selections work in Photoshop, right, is we're going to go to the select menu, right? And there's a number of options in here. You can select for color range. You can select for focus area. These are all AI based. You can select subject and sky just like you do inside Lightroom, or there's a specific tool for this as well. So if I go to the toolbar and I click on the selection options, there is an object selection tool, right? And the way this one works is as you move your cursor into the image, notice how it automatically selects the object for you, okay? So this is a fast and efficient way to kind of move through an image and select specific areas within the file, right? Now you do have the ability to kind of fine tune these selections a little bit more than you do inside the Lightroom program. So let's say I wanted to select the vase right here, right? I'm going to go ahead and click and it makes the selection for me, right? So clicking will generate the selection boundary. And then I'm going to come over here and with the layer panel, I can choose whatever I want to do. So let's say I wanted to modify the color of this object, then I would use an adjustment layer like hue and saturation or vibrance. If I wanted to control the tonality of it, I would probably go to levels. And so when you do that, you're going to get an adjustment layer, and then you get the mask that's being generated from the selection that you just created. There's a keyboard shortcut, which is Option or Alt if you're on a Windows system. If you click on the mask, you can kind of see an overlay. So you can see what that selection looks like. Did it do a good job? If it didn't do a good job, you can simply edit the mask directly and you can make your changes there. All right, so this is a two-part layer at this point. You have a layer mask and then you have the properties for it. So I'm going to expand this a little bit so we can see the properties a little better. On the properties panel, you will see the adjustment for the levels. And this is where you can, for instance, you can darken up or brighten up the image by adjusting the levels as you see fit. Usually I would use the input levels, not the output levels. All right, so this was adding more contrast if I move my black and white sliders in like that. All right, one thing that's great about adjustment layers in Photoshop is you can make modifications after the fact, which is a little harder to do in Lightroom. In here, I can go in and I can change the blending mode for how my adjustment layer is going to interact with the image, or I can simply just change the opacity. So if I think this is maybe a little too strong, I can fine tune it with very fine degree of control by using the opacity slider. All right, so that's just the AI selection tool that is called object selection. It's over on the menu, the toolbar rather. And so this is a fantastic new AI-based tool in Photoshop for building out selections. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and close this file. And let's go back to Lightroom and I'm going to open up this image. So again, control click, I'm going to say edit in Photoshop. All right, and I'll edit the original again. So this is an example of a scanned film image. I think I shot this image close to 40 years ago. It was shot on Kodachrome film. It's in northern New Mexico. It's near it's in the Navajo Nation, but it's somewhat near Monument Valley. And it's an old scarecrow that was on a ridge. I had to hike up to get to it. And so what I think is really amazing about being able to scan your old images is how much easier it is to fine tune the quality of these images now than it was in the actual physical darkroom. I mean, I used to do a lot of hands-on work in a darkroom. Obviously, I haven't done that for years, but one of the things that is killer about the new digital tools is we have fantastic noise reduction software that can reduce the film grain. We can control the color, the brightness, and the tonality of the images with a lot of finesse. And the selection tool I'm going to use for this one, you're going to find it, and this is if you have the newest version of Photoshop. You know, we have this moving bar, right? And this bar has all of our main commands on it. So there is a object called a choice called select subject. So I'm going to choose that. And select subject is AI based. It's going in and it's scanning through the image, and it does an amazing job. This is vastly superior to any other selection that we had in Photoshop prior to this tool coming out. You know, it fine tunes the selection along the edge. It even found the little wire that's moving between the upper wooden frame and the bottom of it. So this selection is pretty amazing. Now you can always fine tune this too. It's not always going to get it perfect, right? So there's a couple times when you're going to go in there and you're going to say, oh, I missed something, or it didn't really give me as much as I want, okay? So the selection that's being visible on the screen right now, the most common way that I would fix a problem selection with the AI tools, they're not perfect. But what I do is I use a technique called quick mask. I don't know if many of you are familiar with it, but it's a fantastic tool for modifying or updating or improving a selection. And the way it works is there's a simple keyboard shortcut for it. So if I hit the letter Q on my keyboard, it enters the quick mask mode. And so quick mask shows me the background is covered with this blue kind of film. And again, you can control the color of this in the preferences for quick mask. And then my object is clear. So if I zoom in on it, we can take a look around and see if there are any problem areas. All right, so it's looking pretty amazing. If there are problems, if there's something that you want to remove, it's very easy in the quick mask mode. What you do is you grab a paintbrush, right? So I'm going to use the paintbrush here. I have options for the size and the hardness of my brush, right? And I also have, in quick mask, you only have two colors. You have either black or you have white. And the black adds to the mask, so it would add the blue mask that we see in this image. The white will remove it. So if I click on white, and if I want to be super precise with this, I'm going to go ahead and choose pure white. I'm going to zoom in really tight, and I can see that there is a little bit of a problem right at the end here where it didn't get everything. Now this is going to be, really taking it to the nth degree. So if the keyboard shortcuts useful for the brush are the bracket keys on your keyboard. So the right bracket key will make a brush smaller. The left bracket key makes it larger. So with those two keyboard shortcuts, I can fine tune the size of my brush. And so it missed a little bit right on the tip of this little fragment of cloth, and it looks like a little bit right here too. So all I have to do is if I paint with white, I'm going to use X key to switch my foreground background color. I can move my cursor in here and I can now paint, and I can remove the blue mask that's covering this little piece of fabric, right? And if I come back here, I can kind of fine tune these. And it looks like I went a little too far, which is fine. That's okay. I always have my hand on the keyboard, so I hit the X key and that switches back to black. And with black, I can fine tune it and I can get it really, really precise. So going back and forth between white and black, you can refine your selection and get it absolutely perfect. Now, I'm not going to do any more than that for my demo. Let me zoom out. So first of all, considering how complicated this selection was, the AI selection did a phenomenal job of getting it right. And so if I hit the letter Q, it will go back into the normal selection mode. Now I can use the selection to create any kind of a mask that I want with an adjustment layer, or I can copy and paste details in here, whatever I need to do. Okay, so those are two of the new AI strategy tools for building selections, both in Lightroom and Photoshop. All right. I'm going to go ahead and close out of this one. Let's head back over to Lightroom, and I'm going to go to a different image. Let's try this one next. I'm going to go to Camera Raw Filter. So this is a file that was captured just a couple months ago. This is down in northern New Mexico. It's the Bisti Guinazin Wilderness area. Has some of the most interesting geological formations I've ever seen. I wanted to show you a typical workflow from start to finish. This is the image as it came out of the camera. All right, so this is the original raw file. It was early in the morning, very, very strong shadows in the foreground, so much so that there's barely any visible detail. All right, the rock itself is clearly delineated against the sky, but the foreground is a mess. All right, so here is the first stop. All right, this is taking the file into the Lightroom develop module, right? And I'm going to show you what I did for the first couple steps. So again, I'm using the layer mask tools or the masking tools in Lightroom here. So when you create it, when you open up the masking tool set, you can see I have 4 separate masks in here, right? If you hover your cursor over the mask thumbnail, you'll see where that mask has been painted. So this one was called Shadow. If I select it, you can see what I've done here. The shadow slider has gone up, right? The black slider has gone down, right? If I go scroll down a little bit more, you'll also see that the clarity slider has gone up and the texture slider has gone down. So there's a lot of different tools available when you're working with the mask. Almost all of the primary tools that are available in the general Lightroom develop module are available to use as strictly as a mask. If I go to this mask, you can see this one's different. This one's painting over the formation, a little bit of the foreground. And basically what I'm doing is controlling the contrast. There's a few other changes there, but I tend to name my mask as I go. And if I click on this one, you can see that there's more than meets the eye here. So I started with the sky selection, right? And with the sky selection, it didn't do a great job, right? What you can see is in the very center of the rock, it missed several of those holes, right? So that's when I go to a brush and I use the brush in a subtract mode. Right down below here, you can add or subtract as many subsets to your mask as you want. So these are subtractions. It removes the areas where it missed it. And here's brush number 2, where I subtracted sort of the middle foreground area from that selection. And the final selection looks like this. right? This one is the cap shadow. So this area under here didn't get quite bright enough. So again, I use the automated selection tool for this. When I say that, I'm not using object selection. What I'm using is a brush. But when I have the brush selected or active, I'm using the brush in the auto mode where it finds and delineates the edges of your selection for you. So when you paint like alongside the edge where the rock meets the sky, it does a great job of finding that edge and giving you good detail. And then finally, the last one is this one called saturation line. This is a very small mask. So there was some odd color artifacts along the boundary between the shadow and the highlight areas, right? And that's what this one is doing. So again, there's a couple brush modifications to the initial one that I created. If I select it, you can see the primary thing this one doing is going to the saturation slider and taking the saturation down. So I got rid of this really annoying orange color cast that was showing up in the shadows. And then here is the final one. So this is, and I'm not going to go through all the steps necessary to get to this point, but pretty much what I did was I doubled up on the foreground shadow slider. I increased the brightness a little bit more, right? I sent this into Photoshop and I did a little bit of retouching in Photoshop to kind of clean up the boundary line between the shadow and the highlights. And this is what the final image looks like. And this one's been printed out as a pretty large image. It looks pretty spectacular. So, you know, what the fun thing in Lightroom is you have this ability to kind of select two different images and do a before-after comparison. So this is my file directly out of the camera, right? And this is what it looks like after I make some changes inside Lightroom and a little bit of work inside Photoshop, okay? Any questions? All right, so let's take a look at a couple other things then. I'm going to go to the neural filters next, which I think are pretty amazing. Let's start with this one. It's a little simpler, right? So I'm going to go ahead and option click and open this one in Photoshop, all right? And we'll edit the original. Well, I guess I had the other one selected. So we'll start with Curry, all right? So I had, you know, the pleasure of shooting the Golden State Warriors basketball team. I got to sit courtside as a photographer. It was a pretty awesome experience. I'm limited with the amount of equipment I'm allowed to carry with me on the floor. If I'm shooting underneath the basket, I can use longer lenses, but if I'm on the sideline, I could only shoot with a 50mm lens, which is a little restrictive when it comes to working with these type of images. So I like the shot overall, but to me, the people in the background are a little too sharp. They're too well focused because that 50mm brings everything in. And I would like to kind of blur them out a little bit. Fortunately, there is a new AI tool inside Photoshop that makes this task really simple. It used to be time consuming, but what I'm going to do is go up, well, to the filter menu. And before I do anything else, I highly recommend that I have to have my layer. Oh, I've already converted it. This is already a smart object, right? Let me undo this. I'm going to control this and I'm going to do what's called rasterize the layer. Normally your layers come in as just pixel-based layers. I highly recommend you when you go to the filter menu, you convert for a smart filter first. This gives us a couple advantages. One, it allows us to re-enable and the filter reenact it and modify it. And you also get a layer mask that can be really useful to modify your selection as well. Okay, so now that I have a smart filter, I'm going to go to the filter menu and I'm going to choose the group called neural filters. Now, these are so new, some of them are still in beta state. So let's take a look. When we open it up, we get a whole new workflow. And you can see that it's selecting the very first one under portrait called skin smoothing. So you can see it's finding the most prominent faces in the image and it's going to work with that. But that's not what we're going to do. We're going to go down to the photography group. There's two of them here that are pretty awesome. And one of them is called depth blur. And this one technically is still in beta. So I'm going to turn it on. All right, and you'll see how it works. So first thing it's doing, if you notice down here, it says processing on device. So it's going through the image and it's building what's called a depth map. so it can see where things are in the sense of depth within the frame of the image, right? It's using the default, which is focus on subject, and it's okay, but I find that sometimes it's not the best choice. So if you look carefully, two really big problems show up. One, this player's name is Alfred Payton. Alfred, his bottom half of his body is great, but the top half is not. It had a hard time separating him from the background. And if you look over here, some of the people in the background are looking really sharp too. So they also were not being clearly defined by the algorithm. And so they're not as blurry as they need to be. So I'm going to turn off focus on subject, right? And when I do that, then you get to move your cursor inside and you can click on areas and it will change the focus subject. Like if I click on Alfred's head, notice he comes back into focus. And a lot of the people in the background do, because again, the operating system isn't seeing a difference between the two. So that's a bad choice. So let's click on Steph Curry. So we click on him. He's the closest one to us, right? And now that it focuses on him, Alfred's top half has gotten out of focus, but all the people in the background now are universally being blurred out. They're not subjectively seeing some of them in focus and some of them not. So it's worth playing around with this option called focus point to kind of refine the way the focus depth will work in your image. There's many other tools available here. You can increase or decrease the blur strength. You can add a little bit of haze to the option in the background. This is fantastic for landscape images. You can also play with color temperature. You can play with saturation and brightness. I'm just going to leave it at the default settings right now. But before I go any further, I want to go down here and make sure I'm using the right output mode. So there's 4 choices. All right, the changes that it's going to make will output it on a new layer, and that's great. But I prefer using new layer mask. All right, now if I didn't have created the smart filter to begin with, it would have created this for me if I chose this option, but this isn't necessary right now. So I'm going to choose new layer mask, and I'm going to click OK. All right, and it's going to generate a brand new layer in the document for me. And this layer will have a layer mask on it. And what that means is, you can see it right here. So here's my image, right? Let's take a look. This is after the filter is run. You can see the background has gotten fairly blurry. And this is before. So this is a before and after quick preview of what we've done here. If I select the mask, like any other mask in Photoshop, if I paint with black, all right, I'm going to move in here and go to a paintbrush, a little bit bigger brush. And if I paint over Alfred with black, notice how he comes right back into focus. Because basically I'm taking the focus off of him. I can take the focus off of anything else in the image if I choose to do so by simply just painting it out on the mask. All right, and again, I'm just going to go pretty quick here. I don't need to be perfect with this for my demo, but that's looking pretty good already. So this is a fantastic new tool, right? You have the ability, of course, with the paintbrush to change the hardness of the brush. It's pretty soft right now, so if I use my shift key and I can make the brush a little bit tighter, right? And then I can go in and maybe clean up down here a little bit better. All right, so anyway, there's an example of a new AI technology called depth blur, and it's built into what are called the neural filters in Photoshop. So I've gone back and I've reworked so many of my old images because I have the ability now to play around with the depth of field after the fact and do really amazing work without it taking forever to get there, okay? So that one's a little complicated. The other one that I have here, let me make sure I select this one this time, and I'm going to send this one through to Photoshop. So we're basically going to do the same thing, except I'm going to have a slightly different take on it. Okay, so with this one, I'm going to, again, another way to convert to a smart object is if you hold your Control or Command key, you can do it directly from here. So I'm going to convert to a smart object. Right, this little icon shows you in the bottom right-hand corner that it's now a smart object layer. Go back to my neural filters. And again, I'm going to choose the same one, the depth blur. right? So I have to activate it, right? This is going to pop up. I'm just going to simply let it do focus subject this time because honestly, even though this isn't the simplest object, it's doing a pretty good job, although I can see her hand is a little blurry here. All right, so I think I'm going to change that. I'm going to turn off focus subject, and we're just going to go ahead and click to edit our focal point. So let's try right here towards the top of the body, see if that works. All right, it didn't look like it updated it very well. So the hand is a little blurry. All right, I didn't expect this, but you never know. So this one is not bad. I will do the same thing. I'm going to output it as a mask layer. I'll click OK. If I didn't see that, I wouldn't have to worry about the layer mask. But because it is there, I'm going to select the mask. And using my black paint, I can just simply paint the focus back in on the hand, just like that. Okay, so again, if you play around with the blur amount, you can make this considerably more blurry or less blurry. Here's the before and after. You can see how it actually is blurring the background more than it's blurring the giant sunflowers that are closer to the camera. So that's what a depth map does. It determines what it thinks to be the optimal variables for the depth in your image are, and it applies a blur based on that depth map. Okay. All right, so let me close this one up and head back to Lightroom. So we've got a couple more things. Let's do, before we go to generative fill, let's look at photo restoration because I think this is a really cool tool as well. So this is a really old image. This is my grandfather taken when he was just a baby. So this is probably around 1902, 1903. I mean, he's a toddler, he's not a baby, but the image is in not very good shape. That's okay. I'm going to send it through to Photoshop and we'll see one of the other amazing
Brad?
new tools. Yeah.
Hey, so this is Andy. So quick question. So the neural filters I haven't used yet, but I played around with inside Lightroom, the new blur options. Have you investigated the pros and cons and differences?
Well, for me, the blur function that is in Lightroom is not bad, but the one in Photoshop is far more powerful and accurate. And it's also, as you saw with the layer mask that can be generated with that, it's easier to modify and make changes if it didn't quite go right. So I'm almost exclusively doing blurring in Photoshop as opposed to Lightroom. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. Is there a functionality? What I've found it sometimes is while you think Photoshop has greater functionality, I found in a few small cases, Lightroom actually is a little bit more advanced. Have you found anything in the blur at all that's more advanced, or pretty much Photoshop's got that plus more?
Well, I think that new neural filter version of blurring in Photoshop is vastly superior to the old Gaussian blur and the surface blur and these other tools that we had in the past.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, until I find an image that I think will work better in Lightroom, I almost always go to Photoshop for blurring techniques. It's not that I do that very often, right? I'm one of those photographers who prefers to get it right in the camera. So, if I can, I will use the appropriate aperture to get the depth of field that I want in my shot. But there are times when you just don't have that option, like when I'm shooting courtside at the Chase Center, I can't do that with a 50mm lens. So that's when the artificial blurring stuff becomes pretty valuable. And any other question?
Yes, this is Robin. So
Okay.
I haven't used these tools yet, so I'm asking my question with a little bit of ignorance. Now, in that basketball shot where you commented that the courtside audience was not quite as blurred as you would have liked, is that the sort of thing where you could take a brush and create a mask and kind of brush that blur in?
Well, it's so if I understand your question, the thing that was being demonstrated in that example was there was varying levels of blur from the foreground to the background,
Right.
right? So, it's possible in Photoshop to do that by creating a new layer, blurring that layer, and using a layer mask and progressively painting on the mask with, 100% black, 50% black, 25% black. So you're changing the strength of the blur selectively around the image. That's how I used to do it. But the issue with that is it's a time-consuming process, and it just doesn't look as good as what the new depth blur feature in Photoshop can give you.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
Yeah, I could see this saving a lot of time if it's accurate.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So I'm going to show you something that won't take a lot of time, which is awesome. So again, first thing I'm going to do is convert it to a smart object. Okay. So this image has lots of imperfections. If we zoom in and we look at it, there's tons of scratches and just areas where the emulsion is damaged. It's a lot of work to retouch something like this. Now, I used to do this professionally. And when I was doing it for that, it was great because I got paid by the hour usually. I made a lot of money doing this stuff. But if I'm not getting paid for it, I don't want to spend a whole day retouching an image like this. So I'm going to go to the filter menu. And again, I'm going to the neural filters, these new filters. And one of them that's in here is called photo restoration. It's also still currently in beta state, so it's getting improved. So I'm going to turn it on and activate it, right? And when this pops up, then I'm going to have a couple of choices to make over here, right? There are 3 steps. You can enhance the whole photo. Essentially what that's doing is it's trying to correct for the resolution of the file, make things a bit sharper and clearer and more contrasty. You also have an enhanced face function, which does a great job of rebuilding and smoothing out skin tones. But the one that's going to be most important for us here is the one called scratch reduction, which currently isn't active. So I'm going to take scratch reduction, and having done this in the past, I know I'm going to need a lot. So I'm going to crank it up to about 80 or so. Again, you can see a progress bar down here saying processing on device. Now, I can tell you that there are 2 options for using the new neural filters in Photoshop. You can use them on your computer, which uses your internal CPU to do this work, or preferences, you can have it use Adobe's cloud servers to do the processing, which oftentimes will give you slightly better results, right? And it will take a little longer because it's having to send this data through your internet pipeline up and back, right? So I'm not using that for the demo because I don't want to waste time, but let's take a look at what we have now. So with this scratch reduction maxed out, not quite maxed out, let's go even a little higher. I almost never go that high, but we're taking it to 92. It looks like it's gotten rid of almost all of the major scratches. So again, I'm going to say new layer mask, and I'm going to click the OK button, right? And it's going to generate a new layer with this fix on it. All right. So here it is. This is before. All right. I think you can clearly see a major improvement in this image. Isn't that amazing?
Crazy.
It's crazy. This is the strength of AI technology. It has the ability to do things in a fraction of the time of what it used to take us to do this stuff. All right. Now, what I'm going to do is it didn't really do a good job of these really big imperfections up here. Right. So there's a way I can deal with that. What I prefer is using something called the patch tool. Right. So this is underneath the healing brush, the content aware move and red eye tool, the one called patch tool. The way the patch tool works is pretty amazing. So I'm going to move in here, and essentially it's a lasso tool to start with. So I'm going to grab this area that I have all this really heavy damage, surround that. And then I'm going to click inside my selection and just drag it to an area that is not so poorly damaged. And just like that, it updates with the texture from this area. So I don't see those radical bumps anymore, but it maintains the brightness values of the document, right? So if take a look at it, it's not bad. I think I'll make a second pass right in here though. I think I can make this look a little better too. Maybe I'll drag this. So you drag it around and whatever the texture you see, that's what is going to be replaced in that area. Now watch when I release this. You see how bright it is on the lower corner of my selection? It doesn't stay that way. Once you release the brush, it updates and it looks amazing, right? So if I were doing this for perfection, I would have to go in, create a couple more extra layers, and physically go in and use the healing brush and possibly use the clone stamp tool to get rid of all these little fine scratches that the auto tool didn't do. But I think for most people, this is probably close enough, all right? It's pretty amazing what you can do with this. So this is the new photo restoration mode that's inside the Photoshop program, okay? All right, so I'm not going to save that one. I'm going to go back to Lightroom. And I think I mentioned this one earlier. So this is one of the first telemark championships. I was the only photographer on the mountain. This is the North American Telemark Championship. You're looking at the guy who won the race. His name is Dave. So this was shot on Kodachrome film about 1980, maybe 81. All right, it's been scanned in and I've cleaned it up a bunch inside Photoshop to kind of improve the quality of the image, sharpen it a little bit, remove any of the blemishes that were in the original file. There was dust and there weren't scratches on it. I take care of my negatives, but dust always gets in there. And, I boost the contrast a little bit and the colors. And you would not guess that this is almost a 45-year-old image, right? This is the power of what the new tools allow us to do, to go back into our older catalog and bring these images up and play with them, okay? All right, so I'm not going to do anything with this one. I just wanted to give you a demonstration of what it looks like when you're working with. All right, so let's go back here to Generative Fill and we'll wrap it up with this. Generative Fill is an amazing tool. Almost everybody has heard about this and how Generative Fill works. There's several different ways I wanted to demonstrate it, right? This is the really strong AI tech that's built into the new version of Photoshop. This is, again, it's an old scanned Kodachrome slide. When I was in grad school, actually in undergrad, I went to University of Colorado. I was for college. I was in the first class that did a semester abroad program in Nepal. And so I took these images while I was a student, and this was shot in Kathmandu. So let's take this into Photoshop and show you what we can do with this image. I love the picture, but it always bothered me a little bit that I just simply cropped in a little too tight on the picture. I was wishing that I could go ahead and kind of get a little bit more space around the bicycle, and just have a slightly different framing for it, right? So this is where the AI tools will come in really, it's almost mind-blowing the way they work. So in order to increase the space around my image, I'm going to have to go up here to the image menu and choose what's called canvas size. So I'm going to choose that first. So canvas is going to make the actual, not the picture bigger, but the canvas that it's sitting on larger. So I'm going to switch it to percent, and I'm going to type in 120% for both height and width, right? And this is going to expand it, all right? And down here you choose what your canvas extension color is. So I'm picking white. I click OK. And so now I have a little more space around my image. This is what I need in order to do the next step. All right, so what I'm going to do next is I'm going to go to my marquee tool, right? Rectangular marquee. I'm going to make sure I have no feather on it. I'm going to click and go build a selection just slightly inside the boundaries of the image, right? Because what this tool that I'm going to use is Generative Fill. It needs to be able to connect with existing pixels to create a really seamless blend, right? So I make a selection here, but I don't want to replace my guy. I want to fill in the blank areas on the perimeter. So I go to the select menu and I'm going to say select inverse. So it selects everything except for the area inside. And now that that's done, I'll bring this taskbar back over and I'm going to say Generative Fill. Right now, you can type something in here if you want something specific, But if you don't want it to make anything up, just kind of riff on what it already has, I recommend a cool little shortcut, which is using just a simple period. So my prompt is not going to be lengthy at all. It's just a period. And this kind of focuses the AI in knowing that it wants to just use only what's inside the image already. So I'm going to click generate and let's see what happens. Okay, now all of this would have been possible in the past, but to reproduce this much amazing detail would be extremely time consuming. The AI generative fill is going to make just a few seconds to do this. All right, so it's working on it right now. Right, and when it finishes, there's my new image. Right, is that not mind-blowing or what? Look at the continuation of the bricks, the patterning in the street. Right, it added more graffiti where there wasn't any before, and it blends perfectly within the existing image. Now, when you use the AI generative fill in Photoshop, it always gives you 3 variations, and those are down here in the properties panel. So if I click on this variation, you see it's slightly different. Now there's some kind of weird thing happening down here, so this one is out for me. It doesn't work. Let's look at the third version. Third version is not bad either. It's a little different. So let's look at the before. This is the first version. This is the third version. It's making up all of this stuff based on what it sees in the existing image. So you get to choose the one that you think is the best, and you're good to go. So that's it for this image right here. So let me go back to Lightroom. I'm going to leave this one open instead of closing it because I'm going to go to the next one. And this one is a little bit different, right?
Can I ask a quick question?
Of course.
Minor point. Instead of typing a period, I just leave it blank. Is there actually a difference between those two things?
Okay, so I work as a beta tester for Adobe, so I work with the engineers a lot, and here's what I've been told. So this is secondhand knowledge from me, okay? If you leave it blank, 90% of the time it will do a fine job. If you use the dot, oftentimes where you might see some really odd results appear, it's much less likely to happen. So
Okay, thank you.
I'm taking their word for it.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to, again, take this one into Photoshop and I'll show you a slightly different tool. Go ahead.
Can we go back to the Nepal image?
This one. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, so when you hit the crop tool, it allows you to expand the canvas through the crop tool. Have you utilized that option? Is there any pros or cons based on what you did versus using the generative expand on the crop tool?
Yeah. Well, the first thing I actually did was I went to the image and I used the canvas size command to expand the canvas.
Yeah.
Actually, you can see that if I turn off my gen fill layer. Right.
Yeah.
So this is what I did. So I took my photograph and I gave myself extra blank space around the edges. And the best way to do this is using the canvas size tool, right? Because it's modifying the base image to make it larger, right? And then when I use the gen fill, after I build that selection, it expands it into that area. If I turn this off, you can see that's what it created, right? So those are the pixels that were generated. And if I go back here, you can see each one of these variations is still visible, right? As long as you keep it as a PSD file or a TIFF file and you don't compress the layer, the gen fill stays active. And you'll see why that's useful in this with this image. So in this one, this was a studio photograph taken at Calumet in San Francisco. I was doing a high-speed flash workshop. And this guy was part of the San Francisco mime troupe and he's juggling. I had a black backdrop, right? I like the shot. I just think it's a little flat and boring with a black backdrop, right? So here's what we're going to do. We're going to use the select subject option that's on our moving taskbar. All right, it's going to do a great job of selecting this guy. All right, there it is. Now he's selected really well. Unfortunately, it didn't get the third ball that he's juggling, right? So what am I going to do? Well, this is now in a normal selection state. So if I go over to my selection tools, right, and I choose the object selection option, let's see if this one works. If I move my cursor over the ball, it does. You see how it now is including the ball in the selection, right? The other option that I could use is the magic wand tool. And if I have it in the add to mode, which it currently is, and if I click on the ball, I can click and add that to my existing selection. All right, so it depends on how accurate the object selection tool is going to be for you, right? The third choice that I would use is quick mask again. I hit the letter Q, right? If I zoom in, this is what I almost always do because it gives me the most accurate selections, right? So if I go back to my brush and I paint this time with white because it's selected a little bit too much, so with my brush tool, I can just simply refine along the edge of this and I can get it absolutely perfect. Now, I mean, I do a lot of commercial work for Photoshop. I messed up right there, but I'll fix that in a second. I did that. So, here's my problem. My brush is too soft. It's feathered. So I need to make this hardness much higher. And I'll go back and correct those mistakes. All right. So again, we'll go along this side here. So, I mean, when I'm doing this for commercial work, you have to pretty much be perfect. You can't be second guessing things. All right, I'm going to switch back to white. I'm sorry, black. With black, I can now paint along that edge and clean up those areas where I didn't quite get it right. This is taking longer than I wanted to, but at least you're seeing the process, which I think is useful. All right. I also want to make note that I'm using a Wacom tablet, which is, a pen tool, a tablet device with a digital pen. This is so much easier than trying to do this with a mouse or a trackpad. All right, so this is close enough for now. I'm going to hit the Q key, and now I have the ball in my selection boundary. Now that I have that, all right, let's go ahead and give this thing a more interesting background. So I want to fill the background. Again, I go to the select menu and I choose inverse. I'm going to go to generative fill, but this time I'm going to use a prompt. So let's just use abstract painting. So a prompt essentially is telling it what you want the AI to generate. Now the prompts can be simple and basic like this. They can be long and complicated. There's a lot of different philosophies on how to do that, but let's just keep it simple right now. Choose abstract painting and I click generate. All right, so as you see, the first step for almost all of the things I've done today is build a selection first. That's really one of the main skills you want to master in Photoshop is learning how to build a really good selection, right? So what's interesting about this is let's look at the second. I can already see the second one's going to be really different, all right? It generated a bunch of new balls, which look terrible, right? Don't like that. I'm not too keen on any of these. So I think I want it to be a little different. So over here in the properties panel, I can refine my prompt. So instead of abstract painting, I'm going to call it subtle abstract painting. And then I'm going to say generate. So it's going to generate 3 more variations for me. You can regenerate this as many times as you need until you get something that works for you. All right. So let's see what we get with this simple modification to my prompt. And not terribly subtle, is it? But wow. All of them, except for this one, it's actually duplicating the balls that he's juggling, right? So, you can further modify this. I could call it watercolor abstract painting. That'll give me a very different sort of look. Let's give that a quick try. All right, let's do watercolor abstract. Let's generate one based on that. It's using the same selection for each of these new regenerative fills. Okay, so now we have something that looks quite a bit different. I'm not sure, which one. That's interesting. Look how it converted one of the balls into a watercolor ball. So we have a number of different options available for us when we're using this Gen Fill. Every single time you run this, it's going to generate something completely different. There are times where I've run this generation maybe 5, 6 before I find something that I really like.
Hey, Brad, could you just
Yes.
say something as crazy as make him a circus performer, or just so that there's a big top behind him or
All right, let's try it out. Let's do circus backdrop. Now, this is where getting a little bit more verbose in your prompt might be useful because you can specify specific things, right? That's pretty interesting. Like I said, that's kind of cool, but I have no idea how it sees this as being a circus backdrop. But as you can see, there's a lot of room to kind of play around with these things. The more detailed the prompt is, the more likely you're going to get something that sort of matched what you thought you wanted. All right, so that's good. I'm going to move on to something slightly different though. All right, so let's go to something a little different. All right, so this is again a studio shot. He's a mime in San Francisco. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to give him a different pair of sunglasses. So let's edit this in Photoshop. All right, so I don't know how many of you feel like this is a legitimate way of using the program. It's up to you. All right, there's a lot of debate right now about how generative AI is changing everything. And is it good or is it bad? There's no real answer for that. All right, so if I look in my channel, I have a sunglass mask that I've already created. If you don't know how to do this, it's not too difficult. All right, you can go ahead and you can make an existing selection and you can store it. And so I made a selection around the glasses, and then I would generate a new one. And so I've already done that. So here's my layer. And my prompt was red sunglasses. So there you can see it's replaced the glasses that he had, and there the frames are different too. It's not just the lenses, right? And down below, here are the variations. So you can see the 3 variations that I have. I can continue to generate more of these as I go. I can make some subtle changes to the prompt, and it's going to update that. So here's another example of how Generative Fill will go in and build something that is completely outside the boundaries of the original image that you captured, right? Didn't make it red. All right, I don't really like any of those, but I think these first ones were better. So that's another example of using generative AI. I have one more. And this one, it'd be interesting if Richard was here. This is my wife's brother, right? I was doing a portrait for him. He's a typewriter aficionado. He's written one of the foremost books on typewriter collections. He has probably about 150 typewriters in his house. It's just crazy. He is nuts about typewriters. But he also, this was for the back of a book that he wrote. He wanted an author image. And, when we looked at the image, we thought, okay, it looks nice, but wouldn't it be kind of fun to maybe give Richard a hat? He didn't bring any with him for this photo shoot. So we're going to do that. So I'm going to go ahead and open this up in Photoshop. All right. And you can see I've already done it. If I show you my selection, that's what I did. So I drew this kind of loose selection around the top of the head, above the eyebrows, above the ears. And then I ran the generative fill. So there's his hat. If I select that, you can see it actually made several different hats for Richard. All right, that one doesn't fit quite as well. That's not bad. I don't know what to think of this tech. I mean, it's pretty amazing that you can now kind of go in there and rebuild almost any image any way that you want by using this new Gen Fill tech. All right. So this sort of wraps up my lecture on the AI tools. We looked at selection, we looked at photo retouching, we looked at being able to play with depth of field after the fact and using the Gen AI. If I go back to Lightroom, I'll show you what I've actually been using a lot recently. I don't think most of this stuff is going to be the cup of tea for people in this group, but you never know. So I've been building what I call digital illustrations, right? So here's some examples of those. Let's go back to the grid view. These are all generated using AI technology, and then they're built out as composite images in Photoshop, right? So I built a whole series of them based on the Lord of the Rings. I have some Western theme ones that I do that I sell here in Durango. If I open this one up, you can kind of see how it's built. So let me edit it in Photoshop so you can see the structure, right? There's a lot of layers that go into building one of these. Although this one doesn't have any of the layers in it. That's interesting. So you can't see the individual pieces. This is the finished piece. Everything in here is AI generated, but most of it is done in bits and pieces and then it's composited together in Photoshop. Let me go back in here to Lightroom. So if I scroll up here to Mid-Journey and choose cowboy hat, right, you can kind of see all the elements that were used to build out this file. So everything you see here, the rope, the hooks, the hardware, the tackle, it was all AI generated. And I used a program called Mid-Journey to do this, right? And then I go into Photoshop and I composite all of these things together to create the final image, okay? So that's kind of a little bit of a glimpse into where I've been going with my just having fun outside of the realm as being a photographer. All of these were generated in the past couple months. So, so that's one from my dog, actually. So I took an image of my dog and I turned him into a steampunk character. So generative fill and AI, I think, is a really interesting tool. I think we have to understand that the cat is out of the bag at this point. It's not going back. And I can tell you with a fact that most of my students at college level, they are soaking this up. This is what the next generation of artists are going to be using. They'll still be photographers, but photography is not going to be the same because these tools are changing everything about the way we work. So there's a little bit of, behind the scenes look at this. This one with the marmot in it, this was in Crested Butte, actually. There's a small pond north of town on the road up to Schofield Pass. And the Department of Transportation actually put a marmot crossing sign on the road there. I've never seen one anywhere else. So that was a springboard for my idea for building out this image. Each of these 4 marmots are computer generated and they're added into the background. Okay, so that's kind of wrapping up what I had planned for today. Hopefully there was enough information in here to keep most of you at least partially awake and interested in the tools that I've been showing you. So
One more question.
of
if
course,
I
as many
may.
questions as you
This is
need.
Robin. So given what you said about the impact that AI is going to have on the processing, if you will, the editing of photos, what do you see for the future of cameras?
I don't know if I can see that far ahead because this stuff is changing so fast. My wife was pointing out some stuff to me just today. She was at a presentation where they were showing some of the new AI chatbots that are doing video-based, AI tools. And, in a year, we're not going to know what's real and what's not real. I mean, that's just the reality of it. These tools are getting so good. Both the still images like I'm demonstrating today and the video tools and even the text tools, they're going through growing pains right now. But at a certain point, they're going to be at a level that's going to be very polished. You can either ignore it if you want, that's fine. But, if you're in the industry, like all my students are, they can't ignore it because this is where everything is going to go for commercial artists, photographers, and things, because this is going to be requested as part of the process going forward. All right. Looking at the screenshots, we're all prior to social media and all of that, this is outside of our wheelhouse, right? But the younger crowd, this is something that's really getting them excited. And I'm seeing some amazing work coming out from my students as well. Interestingly enough, this is an ongoing discussion. In my department at San Francisco City College, I'm one of only 2 instructors that allows my students to work with AI tools. All the others, they're forbidding it from being in the classroom. I understand their point of view, but I think they're doing their students a disservice because, that's a dinosaur mentality. It's just not going to be something that will work in the future. You don't have to use any of this. Although I hope you do play around with some of the things I demoed today. The selection tools are fantastic. I mean, part of the way that we've edited in Photoshop forever has been able to isolate objects within our composition and change them in some way, change their color, change their brightness, change their contrast, reduce the noise. I mean, I did that back in the darkroom, the old dodging and burning techniques, right? We've all done that from day one as photographers. Nothing ever really came out in a final print the way it came out of the camera without some modification. It's just today we have much more advanced tools to work with. Okay.
I have a question.
Sure.
So, in the future, right now, the machine learning of generative AI and all this other stuff is based on the existing corpus of photographs.
Right.
Now, in the future, there might be many fewer photographs because art directors and whatnot are, instead of hiring photographers to do shoots, they'll just generate what they need. So in the year, I don't know, 2045, how will the machine learning take place, since the corpus will be entirely of ancient photographs from the year 2024 and earlier?
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you want my honest opinion, in the year 2045, we're going to have direct machine neural interface. All of this stuff is going to be absolutely antique. None of it will exist in 20 years, right? Because that's the speed at which our technology is changing. That being said, there's a huge debate, in the industry right now about the viability of AI generated tools, because they are having to build their data sets off of something. Now, Adobe, for instance, has taken the high road here. All of the stuff I showed you inside the Adobe app, that's coming from a tool set called Adobe Firefly. And Adobe Firefly does not use images scanned or scraped from the internet. They're only using images in their data set that are part of the Adobe, oh my goodness, what do they call it? My brain is shutting down on me.
Isn't
The
there a
Adobe,
stock library?
Adobe stock collection, right?
Yeah.
So Adobe has hundreds of millions, if not billions of images in their stock collection now. And so those are the images that it's sort of pulling some of that information from. But you also have to understand, every time I ran that generative tool to build those different hats or those different abstract backgrounds, every one of those resulting images is now stored and saved into the data set. So that becomes something that can be used for future generative tools. So it's an exponential explosion of content that these AI tools are going to have available to them. I think at some point it's going to be impossible to, defend copyright with the way the AI tool sets work. I don't know. We'll have to wait and see, because there's a bunch of things going through Congress right now about what are the repercussions of the AI technology using content that it's getting from copyrighted sources. I don't have an answer.
Brad,
Yeah.
give me some clarification. I'm on a number of sites where photographers post stuff, and you can reply to it, and people reply immediately. AI, what nonsense. Isn't there some protocol now where it's embedded permanently in the file? that if you had to prove it, I mean, if I submit it to Carl and I tell him I did it myself, can he look at it and say nonsense?
Yeah. Well, that is the knee-jerk reaction that I'm seeing everywhere right now. Because, people don't really understand. But to settle your fears, there are several, and Adobe's one of the companies that's built a tool for this. They can look at an image and they can tell you if there was AI used, right? They look at a pixel level to see, how things were being built and generated. So we already have tools that can definitively say, okay, this is an original photograph, no modifications. This one has AI content in it. So, I mean, that stuff exists now. It's only going to get better. So, there's no way to fool people. People that are in the know, they're going to have this access to this technology, right? When you post things on the internet, though, anytime you show somebody something really amazing, they're going to, oh, that's AI generated. I saw some images from the Vermilion Cliffs wilderness area in northern Arizona, where the wave and some of the other really spectacular formations are. And everybody's posting these are getting hammered as it's being AI generated, but it's not. I mean, nature has some amazing stuff out there. Like that image I showed you of the alien throne, some people are gonna say that's not real, but yeah, it is. I was standing 20 feet away from it. I mean, I heavily manipulated the final image to bring out detail in the shadows and the color, but there is nothing AI in that editing process. Okay.
Isn't
I
there
don't know.
stamp? I thought in the layer. I'm just not
Metadata.
in the metadata itself. Can't it be quickly, definitively shown to be AI generative?
Well, I think that's what a lot of the companies are working on right now. So that will be in the metadata.
I thought Adobe had already done it. Was the reason I asked.
Oh, it's not widely, from what I've read, it's not widely accepted. There are like Brad said, there are a couple of companies that are working on it. It's not a standard in the industry yet. And also, when you edit an image, you can remove that information. As from what I understand right now, it's not a permanent part of the file.
Yeah, all metadata can be erased or modified. So there will be tools that will address this situation. I'm positive of that. All right.
Right,
Because
right.
Right, but
The
even
only
if,
place is going to
they're
demand
kind
it.
of working on them now. And there are some that are, semi-accurate. There's something I read the other day was that I forget who was making the tool, but it's like 98% accurate, except if the image has been edited. Once it's edited, then again, some of that file information is destroyed or removed, and therefore it's not 100% accurate. But yeah, eventually it'll get there.
Yep.
well, the other thing is, what, if you think about it, you can make anything, you can get rid of all that, because all you have to do is do one image, select all, copy it, paste it onto a new image, a new file, and all the metadata is gone anyway.
Yeah.
That's
So.
true.
Yeah.
What?
Yes, don't take that as a method for doing images for competitions, please. Brad, I just wanted to ask one quick thing.
Sure.
When you were working with the neural filters there, a number of them are still in beta, but the Photoshop version that you used, it was not Photoshop beta. It is the latest shipped version.
Exactly. I didn't want to use, I didn't want to use the beta
Right.
for this because you wouldn't have access to some of that in your version of Photoshop. So the one that I use is the current generation of Photoshop as it exists today. I mean,
Perfect.
because I do beta testing for Adobe, I have beta versions that go much further than what you're seeing. I'm under an NDA where I can't really talk about that stuff.
Yeah,
But
of
all I
course.
can say is, it's only going to get more and more amazing as we go forward.
Brad?
Yeah.
Can I ask you one favor? The one I've been playing a lot with is a neural colorized one. And that picture you just did the restore on?
Yeah.
Can you real quickly show everybody what the neural color does to that? It only takes like 10 seconds.
Yeah. Let me go back to my share
Say that
screen.
picture. Yeah.
All
I
right,
just-
so we're discussing,
Yeah, there it is at the top up
so
there.
this is it, but it's not the one that I just played around with.
But even still, I'm just curious just to show the color part to see what it does to it.
Okay.
Don't
Well,
worry
yeah,
about
let me just open this up because you know, I wasn't sure how much time we had today, but I'm happy to answer questions.
Yeah, I just was because I've been doing it a lot, and sometimes it works really well, and other times it doesn't. But it's
Yeah.
pretty.
I'll have to say that in the neural filters, there's things I didn't demonstrate, but I use them all the time. This one called harmonization is amazing and it works with color. Harmonize the color and luminosity of one layer with another layer. So when I'm building out those composite illustration images, like the one with the cowboy hat and all the hardware,
Mhm.
more often than not, I ran the harmonization filter on those new layers to make them blend and match better with the base image that I use for that composition.
Hmm.
So this is a fantastic tool for illustrators and people that are building composite images. The photo restoration one, if we take a look at this one, right, that's what we played around with. All right, so we did scratch reduction pretty high. And if you look underneath adjustments, expand this, there's a few other things that you can play around with, right? Noise reduction, color noise reduction. These things won't really change the color in your image. So were you thinking about the colorize function?
Yeah, that's exactly it. Use colorize. Colorize does a really cool. I've been
Yeah.
doing a lot on
Right.
on these
Yep.
exact pictures. So
It's good because I just installed a new version of Photoshop on my machine. Notice how
oh
it
yeah,
has
it's not there anymore, right? You got to download it again.
it's a cloud symbol, right? That means I have to download this filter. So let me go ahead and do it. It doesn't take long.
No, it should
So
be. Pretty
once this downloads from Adobe servers, then I'll have access to it. All right, so that might be the case for those of you that are playing and exploring the neural filters. You might have to download majority of them before you can actually use them. Okay. All right, so with the colorize filter, this one has some really interesting tools in it. All right, it's designed to take an old image and like hand tint it, hand colorize it, right? So there's a number of different ways that you can play around with this one. You can work with manually coloring it. All right, so let's look at the profile. So let's try, did any of these sound interesting to you guys?
try like retro red or something.
All right, let's do that. Um,
Did it the first time. It doesn't look like it's changing it though.
yeah. We've temporarily disabled this filter. Here's why. They've disabled the filter because of an error. So it's not allowing me to apply it. I mean,
Okay.
I can see the preview of it over here,
Yeah.
but I don't think we're going to get the output because Adobe has,
Oh, no problem. I just want to see. It did at least what I wanted to see what it would do with this exact picture. So
yeah.
So
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah, no worries. I mean, it's pretty incredible how these tools are changing the way we're going to move forward with almost everything that we had to manually do in the past.
So Brad,
Another,
question
another question?
slash, probably question slash comment or vice versa. So Adobe, when you do a generative fill on an expansive area, it does a 2000 by 2000 pixel depth, which
Yeah.
may not line up with your overall megabytes of your image.
Right.
So
Well, let me address that question. All right. I'll go back to my screen share again. So what you're describing is accurate. You know, there a limited resolution that you can get with those things that you're doing. But if you go into the filter menu and you go to neural filters, there is a new one in here called super zoom, right? And super zoom will take an image and it will enlarge it and let Photoshop add detail to compensate for the loss of resolution. So you can take that 2000 pixel output from the Gen Fill and expand it to make it much larger. All right, now, This is Adobe's way of addressing that problem, but I will tell you that's not how I address the problem, right? I have a tool on my computer called Topaz Photo AI. Let me open it up real quick. And this is what I use. So all of those digital illustrations that you see, because they're built essentially with relatively low resolution images, right? So let's go to this guy, for instance. So I'll choose this one. All right, so this was for a different project that I was working on. So this is an AI generated character, all right? When I take it into this program, I have the ability to do a lot of upscaling that makes it incredibly high resolution. So this program will allow me to upscale 8 times the original file size, right? So, and the quality of it, this is probably already an upscaled version. That's why I'm not seeing an option to do it anymore, right? So the quality is insane. So, it does a phenomenal job of creating new detail, new texture, and updating everything. And I lose really nothing in the translation, right? So when you go back and you take a look at any of the projects that I worked on here, if I go back up to the illustration ones, like the one for the Cowboys, right? Well, actually, these are all smaller versions of it in this folder. I don't have the originals in here. Well, this one is the one of Bilbo and the Hobbits. All right. So if I take a look at this one, the resolution of this file is very high. It's 8,736 pixels by 6,348. So, that's probably around 50 to 60 megapixels. And if you zoom in on it, you can see how the details and everything are amazingly sharp because these have been processed using the Topaz Photo AI software to increase the resolution, allowing me to build these complicated compositions where I'm not, restricted by the low resolution output that I get from the AI tools. Okay.
Thank you. There's also 2 other comments. There's another way to address it. The guy Nimesh from Pixel Imperfect, if you're doing like a sky, you're trying to expand a canvas. He actually has a compositing tool where you can actually tell it to generate blocks of 500 or 1,000. So let's say you're taking up, the whole top of your image and you want to create a whole new sky.
Yeah.
It'll allow you to create each block at 500 or 1,000, so you can actually get closer to the resolution without trying to upscale the whole thing. That's worked really well for me. The other comment is, what I've noticed is in Photoshop, there is the remove tool. But I've noticed that once you make your selection of what you want to remove, the auto gen actually is working better than the remove tool. So give it a try.
My take on your question is that these are all just temporary workarounds. The program that I'm working with, Midjourney, is already doing 4,048 pixel square output, and it's moving to 8K within a couple months. So 8K output is very high resolution. So the challenge, of course, all of these AI tools are cloud-based. They're on the servers for Adobe or Midjourney or Microsoft, whoever's running the AI tool set. So it's a lot of data to push up and down through the internet pipeline. That's the biggest restriction right now. And I think that's one of the reasons why we're going to see the cost of using AI tool sets go up in the future, because the size of the server farms and the size of the output that it's generating now, it's just taking a lot of computer processing power to get there. None of these AI tools work on your local system. They're all working online. Yeah.
So in a different camera club, and I haven't been a member of this club very long, it's wrestling with a problem of what rules should be adopted for various critiques and competitions and things like that. I want to ask you, what you think of a framework that talks about photography AI in one of three levels. Level one is you're simply enhancing the photograph as it sits through
Mhm.
sharpening or things like that.
Yeah,
Level two, you're removing an element like a beer bottle on a beach,
yeah.
power line. Level three, you're adding elements. The question is, what do you think of a framework like that or similar to that so that you'd have a way of classifying what it is you're trying to talk about?
Well, I think that's a reasonable assessment of the situation as it stands today. I think we have to accommodate people that are more purist, really, they don't really want to deal with any of the AI stuff. There's nothing wrong with that. That's just their take on it. But there's going to be a lot of people that want to play around. It's fun. I mean,
Right.
it's really interesting. So
My question wasn't about that. My question was, do you think that's a useful framework for talking about AI?
yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Pristine, no AI strictly for doing you know, exposure and tonal changes, or AI where you're adding or removing objects. I don't really see much difference between removing objects and adding objects as far as AI goes,
Okay.
because they're both heavily modifying the original image.
Okay. Good.
How will
Thank
it
you.
affect the photojournalists that are out there that, for the most part, are not allowed to make those changes?
Yeah. Well, the galleries that I deal with here in Durango, the main one, the Durango Art Center, they won't accept anything for the shows that has AI generated content in it. That's just their rules. So, it's going to be a while before those things change, right? I mean, I've been around long enough to remember when this discussion was about digital photography. Digital photography is a cheat. You can't use a camera that's working with a digital sensor. It's not fair compared to film. So, these things ebb and flow as our attitudes change over time. I don't think any of us can predict what's going to happen even a year down the road, but I guarantee it won't be the same as what we have today, right?
Thank you.
Yeah,
Um,
Thank you, Brad.
another,
Thank you very much.
can I ask one more?
of course.
I've been using Topaz Photo AI,
Mhm.
and I have a couple of friends who use it,
Mhm.
and it is causing us to think differently about camera equipment. In fact, I'm about to take a vacation. I've gone back to Micro Four Thirds, figuring
Yeah.
it's mostly travel shots, and if I actually really come up with anything good enough for Focus Camera Club, well, instead of lugging a whole lot of metal with me for 40 megapixels, why not just take this little stuff and use Photo AI if I ever have to up the resolution?
Well, I think that's because you've used the program and you see how amazingly effective it is. I have taken images shot with an iPhone and run it through Photo AI, and I've gotten 30 by 40-inch prints out of them that just blow your mind.
Yeah.
The tools are getting very advanced for upsampling the images that we capture. So yeah, I don't think it's necessary to carry around the biggest camera you can anymore either. It's been an ongoing debate. I remember about 2004, 2005, I was interviewed by the San Francisco Chronicle. I used to have a classroom in San Francisco where I taught digital photography from an early state of the game. I had a lot of the best instructors who came into my space. It was a fun, 10 years of my life. But one of the things that he interviewed me for, and this was like I said, in 2004, 2006, he was like, how many megapixels do they really have to get a good picture? Because if you remember that time, 6 to 8 was sort of the upper range of what the cameras could do, 6 to 8 megapixels. And my response was, if you get a digital camera that's capable of 4 to 6 megapixels, you're essentially have enough resolution to compete with 35mm film at that stage, right? Because it's cleaner, there's no noise in it, it can upsample really easily. And it's true, it kind of scares me when I'm scanning my old images. And I used to shoot Kodachrome 64, which is one of the best color films you could get, very fine grain. It scares me how grainy those images are compared to what I'm used to today with the modern equipment. So the answer is, with Topaz Photo AI, just take your iPhone. It may not be able to get quite the dynamic range that your Micro Four Thirds will, but you'll be able to get outstanding images from it. All right, I'll get off my high horse at this point.
Thank you. Thank you, Brad. This is very interesting, not only presentation, but discussion. Lots of thought, lots of good techniques to try if we haven't already. And really appreciate your sharing your time and your knowledge and experience with us this evening. So
Yeah, my pleasure. It's a little lonely down here in Durango, so it's fun to like I mentioned at the very beginning, there's only 3 people in our local camera club that show up on a regular basis. So it's fun to be able to kind of share this with people that are like-minded and appreciate the input. So thank you guys for having me. I really had a fun time explaining this stuff tonight. Hopefully it was useful for you.
great. Thank you.
Brad, thank you very much. You're an excellent presenter. Obviously, you've done this a very long time, and your preparation for this with the images and all of the masks and everything, it was really, really top notch.
All right. Well, I appreciate it. Thank you, Todd.
Yeah, thank you very much.
So Carl, can we submit AI pictures now for competition?
Well, we'll have to discuss that a little further. We're going to stick with our rules as they are.
Okay.
Using AI tools in your photo editing software is perfectly acceptable.
Right.
But as far as generative AI, where the photo originates from, yeah, we're still going to not use those. But, I had thought at one point that maybe, I don't know if we'll do it this year or maybe we'll do it next year, but one of our open competitions, perhaps we'll also open it up for submissions for digital art created using AI or more heavier use of generative AI, in a photograph you've taken or something like that. But yeah, like Brad said a number of times this evening, that this technology is changing rapidly, and we have to roll with the punches. We have to roll with the changes too. So I would say in the next year or two that, yeah, we'll probably have some, either a specific competition or open up one of the open competitions to accept AI generated images.
Great.
Yeah. I would also add that I don't actually consider or call any of those images that I demoed at the end of my lecture as photographs. I define them as digital illustrations because that's what they are. They're nothing is really photo based in there, even though like the one of my dog, a lot of the programs you can do this inside Adobe Firefly, which means inside Photoshop too. You can add an actual photograph to that prompt line, and it will use that as a starting point. So it can take your photograph and expand on it like it did with Make My Dog a Steampunk Character. So there is a hybrid of both right now, but I think you just have to just go with the general consensus of your group, right? There's no right or wrong when it comes to any of this, in my opinion.
Right. And one of the points that I have always made was that, well, the name of the club is Focus Camera Club. So there is that expectation that competition images come from a camera.
Yeah. All right, you guys, I'm going to go ahead and take off. Thank you so much for your time tonight.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
Take care.
If you
Expect an
want, you
email
can
to,
visit my website and sign up for my newsletter. That'd be great. Just bradpoltjones.com.
Awesome.
All right, guys, take care.
Thank you very much, Brad. And thank you everyone for joining us this evening, both online and in the room at Lone Tree. Appreciate y'all.